Even though deranged MAGA Republican Jim Jordan failed spectacularly to secure the House speakership in his first attempt, he's promised that he will try again on Wednesday. And we don't know what the outcome of that will be. But in the meantime, I want to draw your attention to two clips from two Democratic congressmen who each in their own way demonstrate why Jim Jordan is unfit for the role. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, so two clips, or rather three clips, from two different Democratic congressmen. The first one is the shortest clip from freshman Democratic Congressman Jared Moskowitz, who is one of my favorites. He is the subject of multiple videos because he's so witty, he's so incisive, and he is great at trolling MAGA Republicans. This is him talking about Jim Jordan in an interview with Ben Meiselas from the Midas Touch.
As I've said, which is, for the 16 years that Jim Jordan has been in Congress, okay, I would like to go over right now all of his legislative accomplishments. I want to list them one by one. I'm going to start right now. I'm finished. As I've said.
So that's hilarious. Okay, that's right. As a matter of fact, he probably, like, even the split nanosecond pause between gonna list them now and I'm finished was probably too generous for Jim Jordan. As we discussed, and as I wrote in an article on Luke Beasley's website, lukebeasleyshow.com/news, Jim Jordan is literally, this is not an insult, it's not mockery, it's nothing like that. It is a simple statement of fact based on the legislative record over a span of 16 years. Jim Jordan is literally the least effective legislator in Congress. That's humiliating. That's embarrassing. He's not passed a single bill in 16 years. The guy is a joke, okay? Now I want to bring you to the second Democratic congressman, Congressman Aguilar, who in two clips, and this is on the floor of the House, I guess either right before or during the vote for Jim Jordan, or I guess it was right before, excuse me, he lays out a very effective case as to why Jim Jordan is not fit to be Speaker of the House and second in line of presidential succession. The most powerful person in Congress, Jim Jordan, is eminently unqualified.
Mr. Speaker, it would send an even more troubling message to our enemies that the very people who would seek to undermine democracy are rewarded with positions of immense power. We're talking about someone who has spent his entire career trying to hold our country back, putting our national security in danger, attempting government shutdown after government shutdown, wasting taxpayer dollars on baseless investigations with dead ends, authoring the very bill that would ban abortion nationwide without exceptions, and inciting violence on this chamber. Even leaders of his own party have called him a legislative terrorist.
Sidebar, that's a reference to former Republican Speaker John Boehner, who in 2017 referred to Jim Jordan, whom he worked with, as a legislative terrorist.
He once said, quote, "I didn't come to Congress to make more laws." His words speak for themselves. When New Yorkers recovering from Hurricane Sandy needed Congress to act, he said no. When wildfires ravaged the West, destroying homes and businesses, and those residents needed disaster assistance, he said no. When the Mississippi River floods devastated the South and communities across state lines needed Congress to act, he said no. When our veterans were suffering from disease and dying as a result of their service to our country, and Congress passed a bipartisan solution, he said no. When our ally in Ukraine looked to Congress for additional support to help defeat Putin, he said no. And just before Hamas's brutal terrorist attack on Israel, he said no to fully funding military aid for our ally. This body is debating elevating a speaker nominee who has not passed a single bill in 16 years. These are not the actions of someone interested in governing or bettering the lives of everyday Americans. This is nothing less than the rejection of the oath that we swore to uphold as duly elected members of this body. But on this side of the aisle and throughout this chamber, I'm convinced our oath still matters.
So that's the first of two clips from Pete Aguilar that I want to play. But everything he said was such an accurate and searing indictment of who Jim Jordan is. I mean, again, it beggars belief that the Republicans are so dysfunctional, so incompetent, and so disinterested in responsible governance that they would elevate somebody like Jim Jordan. There are plenty of far-right deranged Republicans out there. There are plenty of Republicans out there who have been lifelong conservatives with whom I have sincere policy disagreements. But Jim Jordan, if for nothing else, you want to make the chief administrative officer of the House of Representatives, again, second in line to presidential succession, somebody who hasn't passed a bill in the 16 years that he's been in Congress, who openly admitted that he didn't come to Congress to legislate. He didn't come to the legislature to legislate. It's so absurd. It's an absolute indictment of what this party has become. But this is the second clip from Pete Aguilar.
He may just be the candidate with the most votes, but he is also the candidate with the most credibility.
This is in reference to Hakeem Jeffries, who, by the way, yes, did have the most votes, 212, the Democratic leader.
If the goal is to continue a 30-year march to hollow out our democratic institutions, weaken our democracy, and embolden extremists, there's a candidate for you. If the goal is to continue taking marching orders from a twice-impeached former president with more than 90 pending felony charges, then there is a candidate for you. The world is watching, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Our allies in Ukraine and Israel are watching and waiting. So let's have this vote, but let's be clear. A vote for the gentleman from Ohio is a vote to turn your back on national security. It's a vote to turn your back on a bipartisan path to fund the government and avoid shutdowns, something we can only do if we reject his nomination. House Democrats are in the minority. We realize that. If House Republicans wanted to elect a speaker without us, then they could have. There is still a path forward for both Democrats and Republicans to come together to elect a speaker who can unite us behind a common purpose, keeping the government open on a bipartisan compromise that won more than 300 votes just 4 months ago in this chamber, taking up an up or down vote on help so Israel can defeat Hamas and Ukraine can defeat Putin, and reassuring the American people that their legislators have their backs. It's that simple, Mr. Speaker, and we can do it today. Let's work together. Let's elect a speaker who will reach out a hand of bipartisanship and deliver for the American people. That is why, once again, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I'm proud to nominate Hakeem Jeffries for Speaker and yield back.
Fantastic speech from Pete Aguilar. Now, again, as of the first floor vote, Hakeem Jeffries did come out with more votes than Jim Jordan. But Jim Jordan's going to try again tomorrow, and I imagine he's not going to stop because he doesn't seem like the sort of person you can shame. So I imagine the only thing that will deter him is if certain moderate Republicans, alleged moderate Republicans, indicate that they will work with Hakeem Jeffries in the House Democratic Conference if there's not some sort of less radical Republican nominee put forth in his place. I have no idea. All I know is that everything Pete Aguilar had to say about Jim Jordan was 100% accurate, and he is arguably the least qualified person for the House speakership. And that's saying something when you consider that his conference also includes the likes of Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Matt Gaetz.